Hey, Gopher fans, it's another edition of Gopher Talk. It's presented by Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, a locally member-owned full-service financial invested in you. You can learn more at affinityplus.org. It's our pleasure to welcome to Gopher Talk Athletic Director Mark Coyle from the Golden Gophers, and good to see you.
Hey, Mike, it's good to see you. I've been seeing you since the basketball season, and really appreciate everything you do for our programs. Thank you.
Well, you've been a busy person here the last handful of weeks. Of course, you're on the NCAA men's basketball selection committee. You're on the committee, which is in charge of the selection, but there's so much more that goes into it than just picking those fields of 68. You were, of course, in Portland watching the games over the weekend. You'll be in Chicago here this coming week for the Sweet 16 matchups at the United Center. And I guess just generally, tell me how this experience has been for you.
Mike, it's been an awesome experience. As working with you at Minnesota, we've had a chance to go to the NCAA basketball tournament. When I was at Syracuse, our team went to the Final Four. When I was at Boise State, we played in the NCAA tournament. And of course, at my time at Kentucky, had a chance to be in the NCAA tournament and go to the Final Four. And it's really unique to see the tournament from this side of it. Being on the selection committee and learning how the tournament is put together and all the work that the NCAA and their staff do to put together. And again, the men's basketball committee has been a great experience, and just really thankful that I have an opportunity to represent the University of Minnesota in the Big Ten Conference on this great committee.
How was that room in Indianapolis as you guys are trying to figure out those final handful of teams? And, I'm sure you have the resumes up of these teams. What was that experience like?
It was a great learning experience, Mike. The NCAA, we've had several meetings with them over the past 8 months, 9 months when I learned I was going to be on the committee. And they do such a great job of preparing you for that selection week. And they talk about, just how close and razor thin the differences are between teams. And when you're making decisions, you realize it impacts the kids, it impacts the coaches, it impacts the fan bases. And you want to make sure you make the best decisions. And what's unique is there's 12 of us. So you have 12 different perspectives if you look at these teams. And again, your goals to, the NCAA tournament has 32 AQs and 36 at-large teams, and your goal is to find the best 36 at-large teams. So I can tell you the difference between those teams is razor thin, and it was a great learning experience.
It's pretty remarkable when you really do dive into it. And I'm sure there are, most fans are probably just interested in where their team goes and, where it's seated in that. But when it gets down to it, you mentioned that margin of error, and the Gophers, of course, have been on the bubble too in the past, where one win might be the difference from making the NCAA to not even making the NIT. I mean, it could be a 1-win or 2-win difference. I mean, it is a razor thin margin, which means every game counts.
Every game, that's a lot. I think the two takeaways, Mike, that I have is every game counts. You're exactly right. Whether it's the first game of the year or a game in the Big Ten tournament, they're all important games, and you look at the full body of work. But the other thing I've learned is just how competitive this tournament is. When we got down to bracket and I had a chance to sit back, I flew back from Indianapolis late on Sunday, and I was looking at the bracket as after it was unveiled to the public, and I'm looking at some of the first round matchups. And I'm just thinking to myself, my gosh, these are big time matchups in the first round. And, as I was out in Portland this past weekend and saw some big time games out here. And so it's just really interesting to see how that all works out.
So as obviously there's a set criteria for you 12 folks who are trying to decide those at-large teams. And look, there's probably out of the 36, there's probably 25 that are, anybody that's a fan can pick those. And then it really gets, dicey, probably that last handful. And the criteria is there. So you have to follow that. But do you have, like, for me, just as a casual guy watching, I'm like, if a team can prove that it can win some important games and maybe knock off a net ranked 10 and a net ranked 12, I can maybe overlook if they lost to number 170, as opposed to a team that hasn't beaten anybody in the top 15 or whatever. Did you have some personal thoughts as you helped try to have input on that in terms of what mattered to you more than maybe something else?
Yeah, no doubt. Well, the NCAA does such a great job. Again, they talk early on about how important, it comes down to three things. Who did you play? Where did you play? And how did you do? And if you look at what Coach Johnson and his staff did this past year, we put together a very good schedule. Obviously, we're very fortunate to be in the Big Ten Conference because we're going to have a lot of quality games. You've heard the term quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, quad 4 games. Right. Obviously, those games in the first two quads are very, very important. So when the NCAA, when you start to put together this bracket, you're looking at, again, at that strength of schedule, your quad 1 wins, the quality of those wins, what do they look like? And you do look at what are teams' best wins, what are teams' best losses. But again, the unique thing about it, Mike, and one of the takeaways I have is, it's 12 different people. It's athletic directors, it's conference commissioners, and we all come with different perspectives, different ideas on what we look for. And what I try to do, I try to be very consistent when I looked at teams. And I had a chance, and the NCAA recommended this, that we put together a group back on our own campus. And so, I had Ginny Yalen, who's one of our associate athletics directors, Paul Rovnak, another associate athletic director, Mike Weirspicki, another associate athletics director, and Ryan Livingston, our director of basketball operations. They all worked very closely with me this past year, and we kind of monitored the teams together. We had a Minnesota top 25, if you will, to look at what we thought were the top 25 teams in the country. And that really helped me when I got to Indianapolis. So I have to give a big shout out to that group, because they were phenomenal to help me be prepared when I went in that room and had to make those very difficult decisions, as you said, for those final 6, 7, 8 teams. Because again, that difference is razor thin.
No question. Now, if there was, I guess, I think generally there was not much, in some years the committee gets blasted. Like, how could this team get left in, and how could this team not be in? And I thought generally that was not the case here. I think generally it was accepted that, hey, that was a pretty good field of 68, maybe some seedings, but sometimes because of conference affiliations and rematches, you have to bump a team. So I think people understood that. I guess if there was one criticism I saw, was that the conference championship games didn't impact seeding. At least that's the way it appeared. So was that the case? And can you talk a little about that process?
Yeah, what again, Mike, another takeaway is that, you look at the full body of work, and obviously teams can get hot in the Big Ten tournament, or the ACC tournament, the SEC tournament, the Ohio Valley Conference tournament. You see teams get hot, and that's important. Trust me, those wins are very, very important, because a lot of times they're quad 1, quad 2 wins. But again, you want to look at the full season. You want to look at the entire picture, the entire body of work of the team. Who did they play all year? What was their strength of schedule? What was their winning record in those quad 1, quad 2 games? So again, I can see where outsiders may look at it and say, well, my gosh, this team really tore it up in their conference tournament. Why didn't you look at them? Well, maybe if you look at their non-conference schedule, maybe one of the worst in the country, right? And so you've got to strike that balance. So again, it's a lot of analytics, and I always joke. You've heard me use this phrase many times. I'm an undergrad from Drake, 4 years of Shakespeare, and I do this for a living, right? But again, it's been a great experience, and really learned a lot. And I think things that will help us at Minnesota as we continue to build our basketball program for not only the men but the women's side as well.
Yeah, as you were on that side of it, as you said earlier in our discussion here, what was your takeaway from that maybe you can come back and talk to Ben Johnson and say, hey, here's how the committee thinks, or even Lindsay Whaling for that matter, because I'm sure there's not a lot of difference on the women's committee either. Did you have a couple of things that you might share with the coaching staffs?
Yeah, well, I think two things, Mike, and I can tell you, because of the gender equity review that was done after last year's men's and women's Final Four, we've had a lot of committee calls for both the men's and women's committee, which has been great, because we've had a really good learning experience working with the women's committee, and I know a lot of people on that committee. Beth Getz, who worked at Minnesota, is the vice chair of the women's committee. She'll be the chair next year. Lisa Peterson, who I worked with at Kentucky, is now the number 2 person at Oregon. She's on that committee. So we had lots of conversations and interactions. So there's no doubt this experience allows me to look at both our men's and women's basketball program and try to help them. And again, I don't mean to repeat myself. Who you play, where'd you play, and how did you do? I think those are very, very important. And when I talk to Lindsay and Ben, we talk about that all the time. How can we be very intentional with our scheduling? And again, we're very, very blessed with the Big Ten Conference. It's so strong on the women's side. It's so strong on the men's side. And as Ben continues to build our program, as Lindsay builds our program, has that top 7 recruiting class coming in next year, we'll get those quality games because of our conference, but we also have to be very intentional in our non-conference scheduling to make sure we schedule people that will help build and enhance our resume when we do get into that selection process.
I want to ask you about this real quickly in our last minute. You maybe saw the best March Madness moment up to this point when an Indiana cheerleader put one of his fellow cheerleaders up on his hands to get a basketball out of the shot clock. That was pretty cool.
Mike, I was exchanging text messages with Jeremiah Carter, our director of compliance. Jeremiah real well, and he's got a great sense of humor. And I told him, you can't make it up. The ball actually gets stuck. And I looked at the official, and in my mind, I'm sitting on the scorer's table, kind of where you and Spencer sit for basketball games. I'm right down there in row 1. And I happen to be right next to the bench of the Indiana bench. And everybody's kind of looking at that ball stuck up there. And all of a sudden, this cheerleader stood up and said, I got an idea, and it worked. And Jeremiah sent me a text, and I said, Jeremiah, that falls under the category of you can't make it up. So, but
No,
what a great moment! What a great moment!
yeah, that better show up on the one shining moment at the conclusion of the tournament, because that was awesome, no doubt about it. Well, hey, Mark, it's been fun. We thank you, and continued success. And I know you'll be in Chicago for the Sweet 16 this coming weekend.
Yeah, hey Mike, we appreciate you, and thanks for everything you do for our student athletes, coaches, and program. Go Gophers!
All right, there he is, the athletic director at the University of Minnesota, Mark Coyle, and that's Gopher Talk presented by Affinity Plus.